How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome to your 2020 year ahead horoscope for Cancer, Sun, and Rising. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. In this video, we're going to be going over all of the major transits of 2020 by each quarter and how they'll be affecting you. And now, while there is a lot of astrology happening next year, we're going to be briefly going over the major events so you guys have a general idea of what's going to be going on for you guys this year. Now, if you would like a more in-depth and specific analysis of what's going to be happening for you for 2020, please be sure to check out my website where you guys can purchase a year ahead reading from me, where I'm going to be going over all of the specific transits and the big major events that are going to be affecting you specifically for your chart for 2020. And if you like this year ahead horoscope and you also like weekly horoscopes and monthly horoscopes, please be sure to check out my page and subscribe for all of the latest astrology info and updates. And also follow me on Twitter if you guys like to talk about astrology and engage with me, as well as a bunch of other astrologers. If you're not on astrology Twitter, get on there already. And if you'd like to support me and my work and get access to exclusive content and knowledge about astrology, be sure to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/whitelightAstrology. And now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the horoscope. So before we even begin 2020, we are ending 2019 off with Jupiter entering Capricorn. Now, Jupiter is going to be in the sign of Capricorn for basically the whole year of 2020, so I want to make sure I talked about this. Now, Jupiter is going to be entering and transiting your 7th house for the next year, which is pretty good because, Saturn and Pluto's been in there, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, Jupiter, of course, is the planet of good luck, fortune. He brings gifts. He expands whatever he touches. It's a really good planet. It's a benefic planet. However, the only problem is Jupiter is now entering its sign of fall, Capricorn, which means Jupiter doesn't really necessarily have all the tools it really could use to do the best job. Now, Jupiter in Capricorn is kind of like making do or making the best out of what we have or what we're given. Now, the good news is that this is happening in your 7th house of relationships. So especially for you guys, Cancer risings, you've had a lot of stuff happening with Saturn and Pluto happening in your 7th house. You've had a lot of relationship issues come up. With Jupiter going through this area, you're going to find some alleviation from that. Jupiter in Capricorn really is about making do with what you have and making the best out of the situation that you're in. Now, as we do move forward into 2020, though, the first thing that we're starting 2020 off with is the big Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Now, you guys have probably felt the themes of this come up over the past 2 or 3 years with Saturn being in Capricorn, but finding yourself in a restricted place with relationships, finding yourself with walls and barriers with other people, because this just isn't about necessarily, romantic relationships, but any personal relationship, whether it's, like a friend, a coworker, whatever it is. Saturn could be bringing some responsibilities, obligations, walls, constricting that area for you. And as Saturn conjoins Pluto, this is kind of like getting the bad hand in a sense. And I don't want to make this like a doom scope or anything, because it's not what it's about, but you guys have felt this theme. It's not going to come overnight. Like Saturn and Pluto is kind of like realizing where you have to settle boundaries and where you have to restrict yourself in relationships, and what about relationships you need to restrict. And with Jupiter being in there, this is making the best out of that situation. So it's not awful. It's not super bad. There's just a lot of seriousness that's going on in the 7th house for you guys. Then the next big thing we've got going on in 2020 is the first of 3 Mercury retrogrades that we're going to be having this year. This one is in Pisces, so very similarly to the 2019 Mercury retrograde in Pisces we had, you'll see a lot of the themes play out in a very similar way. Now, Mercury retrogrades in Pisces, or Mercury retrogrades, are about rethinking, revisiting, reviewing, going over things, having to backtrack a little bit, which can be annoying and frustrating, but aren't necessarily all that bad. However, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 9th house of your beliefs, of your faith, of, higher education. So if you're in school or if you're in some type of, religious practice. So during this time in February, you might be rethinking what you believe, going over where you want to go, since the 9th house is about long distance travel, or maybe publishing a book. Mercury retrograde is just a time to revisit and rethink. And as this is going on in Pisces, the sign of beliefs, the signs of duality, the sign of spirituality, this is going to be a good time to really reflect on what you believe and what you're going to do with it. Then on March 1st, we have Saturn entering Aquarius, where it's going to be for the first couple of months of 2020, and then it'll go back into Capricorn. However, as Saturn moves into Aquarius, there's a big theme that changes. And the sense of restriction and discipline, authority, systems, how all of the stuff you've had to deal with relationships is now going to go into your 8th house. And the 8th house rules a lot of different things. So my advice is inform yourself, educate yourself, learn a little bit about the 8th house to see what exactly it's going to mean for you, so you don't have anything to fear, because the 8th house can be a scary place. The 8th house rules death, other people's money, taxes, debt, inheritance, which is a good thing. But the big thing about the 8th house is that it rules a lot of the things that are hidden that other people have that you don't really see. So as Saturn goes into Aquarius, you're going to start seeing a lot more restrictions in this area, a lot more obligations, responsibilities, consolidation. And so that could be a good thing where you're consolidating debts, where you're addressing any owed money or addressing what other people have. The 8th house is always looked to as change or transformation as well. So this might be a very big time where you're doing a lot of things differently, kind of like, leading the blind almost in a sense. However, as Saturn does move into the Aquarius, the sign Aquarius is all about connect or disconnect. And so I think it's going to be a really key theme to really look at, are you disconnecting from this 8th house area a little bit more, or are you going to have to connect yourself into this area a little bit more? But then, as we end the first quarter of 2020, we're going to be having Jupiter conjoin Pluto. Now, this is going to be something that we're going to talk about towards the end of the year. However, Jupiter, that planet kind of making do what you have as it conjoins Pluto, this is kind of realizing that, what you have is you're going to really have to use it for this situation. It's kind of like, worst case scenario situation, and you have what little you have to kind of utilize with it. Now, this isn't a bad thing at all, but this is kind of realizing where you can kind of find luck, find hope, find faith, and utilize and believe what you have with you, whatever it is that you have. Use that to help you when it comes to changing how you behave in relationships, changing how you operate in relationships, changing the type of relationships that you have. And this is kind of like setting in that stone. Now, as we do start the second quarter of 2020, we're beginning it on May 5th with the nodes changing signs and the eclipses now happening in Gemini and Sagittarius. So the North Node is moving from Cancer, from your first house, and into your 12th house, which is going to be a huge relief because you guys have had Saturn, Pluto, and the nodes all on your first and 7th house. This is going to be a huge relief for you guys, but the biggest thing is the North Node is this, symbolic point of where we focus on, where we're driving ourselves towards, what we're hungry for, what we're consuming, or where we're kind of going towards. And as the North Node moves into Gemini, the sign of information, the sign of communication, the sign of ideas, the sign of thinking and speaking, this is going to be where we focus on what do we know, what information is available to us, what are we realizing. And for you guys, for Cancer risings, this is going to be happening in your 12th house. The 12th house is all about repressed parts that we may not acknowledge about ourselves in the subconscious. And so as the North Node moves into the 12th house, you may be realizing a lot of things about yourself that you may not have realized before, and starting to understand yourself in new ways that you haven't yet. Now, with the South Node being what we're letting go of, what we're going away from, where we just came from, that's going to be in Sagittarius. Now, the sign of Sagittarius is all about our beliefs, all about our hopes, our journey, everything involved when it comes to journeying and expansion and all that stuff. And this is in your 6th house of your work and your routine and your health and what you do every day. And so this is kind of changing your habits and realizing more about yourself that you can implement to make better habits, to have a better routine, to be healthier. And this is going to be happening over the course of a year and a half. So this is going to take some time. But as we go into the second quarter with the eclipses happening, a lot of your attention is going to get directed towards realizing about yourself and letting go of beliefs that no longer serve you. But then on May 12th, we're going to have Venus station retrograde in Gemini. Now, this is one of the big highlights for this year. Venus, the planet of value and love and money, she's wanting you to connect and indulge. As she goes retrograde, this is kind of a value shift on what we're wanting, what we're, wanting to crave. And Venus in Gemini loves stimulation. She loves communication. She loves socializing and everything like that. Now, as Venus does retrograde in Gemini, this is going to be happening in your 12th house, again, of your subconscious, repressed and unacknowledged parts of yourself. And so this Venus retrograde is going to bring up a lot of things that you want that you may not have been open with yourself that you may have wanted, or maybe realize things that you want to connect yourself more towards or stimulate yourself more with that you didn't realize and that you didn't even know that you liked. And this is finding newer joys, getting out of your comfort zone, getting more of the things that you've repressed that you enjoy and bringing them out into light. And so I think that this is going to be a really positive experience for you guys as you guys get to understand a new part of yourself that is really enjoyable. But then we're ending the second quarter with the second Mercury retrograde that we'll be having in 2020, and that is the Mercury retrograde in Cancer. Now, again, we had a Mercury retrograde in Cancer in 2019. However, it did station retrograde in Leo then. But you can still look at 2019, that summer, even though that was a crazy summer, look at that Mercury retrograde phase and look and see how it will be similar to this year. Mercury retrogrades are all about rethinking, revisiting, and reviewing. And as this is in the sign of Cancer, we're talking about needs. We're talking about nurturing. We're talking about trusting. And this is happening in your first house. So this is about yourself. This is about how you view yourself, how you react, how you respond. So this Mercury retrograde is going to look a lot like you kind of rethinking and revisiting how you see yourself, how you nurture yourself, how you kind of like take care of your own needs. And this is Mercury. This is about understanding. This is about rethinking. And so you might be seeing yourself in a new light during this time. Then as we get into the halfway point, we get into the third quarter of 2020 is when we're going to have Saturn retrogress back into Capricorn. So while Saturn went through your 8th house and you were kind of dealing with some stuff there, it's going to go back into your 7th house. You're going to have to revisit the responsibilities, obligations, or the walls, or the limits, or the barriers you might have had within relationships. And you kind of have to come back and address that one last time with Saturn going back into Capricorn. But then a few days later in July, we're also going to have Mars start to enter its shadow. So during this time, while Mars is in Aries and we're feeling energized to do a whole lot, this is happening in your 10th house of your career. You're going to be wanting to do a lot of things in your career and have all this energy towards it. As Mars goes into its shadow during this time, whatever you're doing, you're going to be coming back over. So don't expect to make final results then. Expect to be coming back to these things. And then just 3 days after that, Venus leaves shadow. And I bring it up this way because as Mars starts to enter shadow and go through Aries where it's kind of like, I need to kind of do a whole lot of stuff in my career. As Venus goes direct and moves out of shadow in Gemini, this is where you start to tread new ground. Like after you find a different part of yourself that you value or that you realize, you start to value yourself more, do different things with it, move your energy different. But then as we move forward, we're going to have Mars start to square Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn while it's in Aries. And so while you're having all of this energy in your 10th house, you might feel that start to slow down a little bit. And you might find yourself in kind of a rut and stuck between what you're wanting to do with your career and the relationships that come with that. Now, again, this all this Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stuff is happening in your 7th house of relationships. That's not always romantic. It's just any type of personal relationship that's one-on-one on an individual level. And so you might have some problems getting where you need to go or doing what you want to do in terms of your career when it comes because certain relationship aspects may be holding you back right now. And this may be a time to really reflect on what are you going to do about it. And the time to reflect on that is starting September 9th when Mars stations retrograde. Mars going retrograde is moving backwards, and this is the energy planet, and when it's not moving forward and it's moving backwards, there's kind of like a delay here. Mars in Aries retrograde is a lot slower than Mars in Aries direct. And as Mars is in Aries retrograde, this is kind of having to last minute go over all the stuff that you missed in order to not miss the opportunity to move forward. And as Mars retrogrades and it starts to square Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto again, this is going to be the time to kind of handle and battle whatever situation that you're dealing with in relationships to kind of get over that and to not let that affect you moving forward in your career. And then as we move into the fourth and final quarter of 2020, we get into the big grand finale because 2020 is ending off with a bang. But during this first part of it from September to October, this is when we're going to be having Mars make those squares to Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto. So this is that time where you start to make those releases, cut those ties, start to do different things and take different actions and get different results from those actions. But then in October, we also have the third and final Mercury retrograde of 2020, and this one's going to happen in Scorpio. I'm recording these in October of 2019 right now, where Mercury's just about to station retrograde in Scorpio. So what you should do is definitely reflect on what did Halloween to November of 2019 do, what was going on then, because a lot of similar themes are going to come up for you during October of 2020 when Mercury retrogrades in Scorpio again. And this is Mercury retrograde. We're talking about rethinking, revisiting, reviewing, but this is in the sign of Scorpio. So there might be some things that kind of get uncovered that weren't expected, that weren't seen originally. Scorpio is all about uncovering that truth. And this is happening in your 5th house. Now, the 5th house is all about love and romance, sexual energy, creation, what your art, what your hobbies are, what you're interested in, what makes you have fun. The 5th house is an extension of you. It's what makes you unique. It's your special gifts, talents, and abilities. It's what you can create. And so as Mercury retrogrades right here, this might be a really big time to be rethinking more about that side of yourself. And then once we get into November, on November 12th is when Jupiter is going to come back and conjoin Pluto for the third and final time. And like I said in the beginning of this video, with Jupiter kind of helping us utilize what we have and make the best out of a shitty situation, this is Jupiter conjoining Pluto, where it's kind of like, yeah, I made the best out of this situation with what I was given, and it did change everything, and it did work. So this is a really exciting transit, especially because the next day on November 13th, Mars stations direct, and then Mars starts to move forward. It starts to, kind of get over that Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto hump, and we get to initiate new energy and start new things, which is really, really exciting. And again, this is happening in your 10th house of your career and in your 7th house of relationships. So there might be a lot of individual relationships involved that might be holding you back or might be helping you utilize yourself to get and to gain the ground that you're looking for in your career. But then as we end November and get into December is when we're going to be having the second set of eclipses, this time in Sagittarius, where it's going to be focusing on your work, your employment, your day-to-day routine, your health, your habits. And so during this time is when you're going to start to reflect on and what you're wanting to release from that doesn't work for you any longer, what no longer serves you, what beliefs or what, habits just aren't going to necessarily work for, I don't want to say like your new life, but as you start to move forward. And then the final showdown, the big grand finale in December of 2020, before we go into 2021, is when we're going to have both Jupiter and Saturn move into Aquarius and conjoin each other. And this is a huge, huge deal, just like the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January. However, I don't have enough time to explain why it's a huge deal. I would recommend looking into the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. However, what this is going to be is as Jupiter moves into Aquarius, Jupiter, the planet of gifts, of abundance, of giving you things and having faith and a sense of hope, as it moves into Aquarius and it gets to attach itself to different ideas and really connect and embed itself into this area, it's going into your 8th house of debts, of other people's money, of inheritances. So you might find yourself in a comfortable situation where you can be having more access to those type of opportunities with, like inheritance or other people's money, having more access and, gifts with that. However, with Saturn going into Aquarius as well, with a lot of gifts comes a lot of responsibilities. And that's basically how we're starting 2021. It's going to look a lot like us going into it with, a whole new perspective and a whole new fresh sense of ideas, but with that, a whole new set of rules to play by. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here, watching this video, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. Again, if you want a more specific and detailed analysis of 2020, please book a reading with me. I'd love to read your chart for you. With that being said, I'll see you guys next time.